November 1945, Bavaria, Germany. The first snow fell on the prisoner of war camp like ash, silent and absolute. Anneliese Fischer stood at the fence, her breath forming white clouds in the frozen air, watching American soldiers unload trucks of winter supplies. She had perfected the art of looking without seeing, of standing close enough to observe but far enough to appear indifferent. She was 19, employed by the occupation authorities as a translator and administrative clerk. Her English was flawless, learned from her grandmother who had lived in Boston before the Great War. It was this skill that had saved her family from starvation, that had given her access to the American base, that had placed her exactly where she didn't want to be, close enough to care. The Americans called the camp Lucky Strike, a temporary holding facility for German prisoners awaiting repatriation. Over 15,000 men lived behind that wire, sleeping in canvas tents, waiting for papers that would allow them to go home to a Germany that no longer existed. Most were young, boys really, who had been drafted in the final desperate months. Others were older, Wehrmacht veterans who carried the war in their eyes like a sickness. Anneliese's job was simple. She translated documents, processed discharge papers, facilitated communication between prisoners and administrators. She was supposed to be neutral, professional, invisible. But there was one prisoner she could no longer ignore, no matter how hard she pretended. His name was Lieutenant Michael Schneider, 24 years old, former Luftwaffe pilot, shot down over France in 1944. He had been transferred to Lucky Strike 3 months ago, and from the moment she had processed his intake papers, something inside her had shifted. She told herself it was nothing, just recognition of a shared language, a shared defeat, a shared understanding of what it meant to survive when survival felt like punishment. But her heart knew the truth. She had been watching for him every morning, listening for his voice during roll call, finding excuses to walk past his section of the camp. And worse, she had started to see the same awareness in his eyes. The way he would pause when she passed, the slight nod, the carefully neutral expression that concealed everything. They had never spoken beyond the official exchanges. Name? Schneider, Michael. Date of birth? June 17, 1921. Next of kin? A pause, none living. That pause had broken something in her, because she understood it. Her father had died in Stalingrad, her brother in Normandy, her mother from pneumonia, the winter the food ran out. She too had no one left. They were two ghosts processing paperwork in the ruins of their country, pretending the world still made sense. The American soldiers noticed nothing. To them, she was just the German girl who typed fast and never smiled. To the prisoners, she was the collaborator, the translator who had sold her loyalty for food and warmth. Neither side saw her. Only Michael did. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. Because in occupied Germany, in a prisoner of war camp, under the watch of American guards and bitter German prisoners, caring was a luxury neither of them could afford, so she pretended not to care. She buried her emotions beneath efficiency, beneath professionalism, beneath the armor she had built to survive the war. But every morning, when she saw him standing at morning formation, his face gaunt but dignified, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found hers, her heart betrayed her, and she knew, with a certainty that terrified her, that pretending would not be enough. The first real crack in her armor came in December. The camp commandant, a practical American major named Roberts, had ordered Christmas packages to be distributed to prisoners who could prove they had families waiting for them. Anneliese was tasked with verifying the claims, checking Red Cross records against prisoner declarations. Michael's file sat on her desk for 3 days before she opened it. She knew what she would find. No family, no one waiting, but protocol demanded she process it anyway. When she finally opened the folder, a photograph fell out. black and white, creased from being carried in a pocket. It showed a young woman, perhaps 20, standing beside a biplane. She was laughing, her hair caught in the wind, her hand resting on the wing. On the back, in faded ink, Elsa, August 1939, before everything. Annalise stared at the photograph for a long time. She should have simply filed it. Instead, she found herself walking to the camp fence during the evening meal when the guards were relaxed and prisoners gathered in small groups around fires, burning in metal drums. Michael was sitting alone, reading a tattered book. When he saw her approaching, he stood, instinctively formal, the habits of military discipline impossible to erase. "Lieutenant Schneider," she said in German, keeping her voice neutral, "I found this in your file." She held out the photograph. He took it, his fingers brushing hers for half a second. The contact was electric, inappropriate, impossible to ignore. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. "Thank you," he said quietly. She should have walked away. Instead, she asked, "Elsa?" "My sister." His voice was steady, practiced. "She died in the Hamburg bombings, 1943. The words hung in the cold air between them. Annalise felt her carefully constructed walls trembling. "I'm sorry." "So am I." He looked at the photograph, then at her. "For everything." It was the kind of statement that could mean anything or nothing. An apology for the war, for losing, for still being alive when so many weren't. She understood all of it because she felt it too. "You shouldn't speak to me," she said. "The other prisoners, they already think I'm—" "I know what they think." His expression hardened. "They think survival is betrayal, that working for the Americans makes you a traitor." He paused. "They're wrong." "Are they?" The question came out more bitter than she intended. "I type their discharge papers while they starve. I translate their pleas while American soldiers eat chocolate. What does that make me?" "Human." The word was simple, definitive. "It makes you human." For a moment they stood in silence. Around them the camp continued its evening routine. Guards smoking cigarettes, prisoners queuing for meager rations. The ordinary machinery of occupation. But in the space between them, something else was happening. Recognition, understanding. The beginning of something that had no name and no future. "I should go," she said. "Yes." But neither of them moved. Finally, an American guard called out, "Hey, Fräulein, everything okay?" "Yes," she answered in English, stepping back. "Just returning a document." Michael slipped the photograph into his pocket and nodded formally. "Thank you, Fräulein Fischer." She walked away, her legs unsteady, her heart hammering. Behind her, she could feel his eyes following, and she hated how much she wanted to turn back. Winter deepened. The camp became a world of frozen mud and bitter wind. Annalise worked longer hours, partly because there was nowhere else to go, partly because it meant more chances to see him. They never spoke beyond necessity, but they developed a language of glances and pauses, of moments that lasted half a second too long. The other prisoners began to notice. Whispers followed her through the camp. "The translator has a favorite. Schneider's whore. Collaborator and her pet pilot." The words cut deeper than any shrapnel. One evening, a prisoner spat at her feet as she passed. "My brother died fighting Americans," he hissed, "and you bring them coffee." Michael stepped forward, his body between her and the other man. "Apologize." "Why?" "It's true. She's forgotten which side she's on." "She's on the side of staying alive." Michael's voice was dangerously quiet. "Which is more than you can say for your brother." The other prisoner lunged. Guards intervened immediately, separating them, dragging the aggressor toward the punishment barracks. In the chaos, Michael looked at Annalisa, and for the first time, she saw real anger in his eyes. Not at the prisoner, at the situation, at the impossibility of everything. That night, Major Roberts called her into his office. "Fräulein Fischer, there's been a complaint." Her stomach dropped. "Sir?" "Some of the prisoners believe you're showing favoritism, specifically toward Lieutenant Schneider." He studied her carefully. "Is there any truth to that?" "No, sir. I process his papers like everyone else's." "Good. Because fraternization between staff and prisoners is forbidden. If I find evidence of inappropriate conduct, I'll have no choice but to terminate your employment." He paused. "I'd hate to do that. You're the best translator we have." "I understand, sir." "Do you?" His expression softened slightly. "Look, I've been in this job long enough to see what war does to people. Loneliness, desperation. It makes people look for connection in the wrong places. But this camp is temporary. In a few months, these men will be gone, and you'll still be here, trying to rebuild. Don't complicate that." She nodded, unable to speak. That night, lying in her narrow bed in the staff barracks, she made a decision. She would stop. Stop looking. Stop hoping. Stop caring. It was the only rational choice. The only way to protect herself, her job, her future. But when morning came and she saw Michael at formation, his face drawn from a night in the cold, their eyes met across the fence, and she knew the decision had been a lie. She cared. Desperately, impossibly, foolishly, and no amount of pretending would change that. January 1946. The repatriation lists began to arrive. Prisoners were being processed for release, sent home in groups of 50. The camp that had held 15,000 was shrinking daily. Soon it would be empty, and the temporary would become permanent absence. Michael's name appeared on the third transport list. Departure date, January 28th. Destination, Munich, where he would be released to find whatever remained of his life. Annalise typed his discharge papers with trembling hands. Prisoner number 47,392. Name, Schneider, Michael. Status, released. She signed her name at the bottom, the ink blurring slightly where a tear had fallen. She didn't tell him, didn't seek him out. For 3 days she avoided the areas where he might be, taking longer routes, working different hours. If she didn't see him, she could pretend it wasn't happening. But on the night before his departure, he found her. She was walking back to her barracks after her shift, the path lit by weak electric lights strung between posts. He stepped out from behind one of the administrative buildings, and she knew immediately that he had been waiting. "You've been avoiding me," he said. "You're leaving tomorrow." Her voice was flat, controlled. "There's nothing to say." "Isn't there?" He moved closer, and she could see the exhaustion etched into his face. "Annalise, we've spent 4 months pretending. Pretending we don't see each other. Pretending we don't care. Pretending this doesn't matter." He took a breath. "I can't leave without saying it." "Don't." The word came out broken. "Please don't." "I have to." His voice was raw. "Because tomorrow I'll be gone, and you'll spend the rest of your life wondering if you imagined it, if I felt what you felt, if any of this was real." Tears were streaming down her face now, hot against the freezing air. "It doesn't matter if it was real. Real doesn't change anything. You're leaving, I'm staying. Germany is broken. We're broken. There's no future here." "I know." He reached out, his hand hovering near her face, but not quite touching. "But that doesn't mean it wasn't true. That doesn't mean I didn't fall in love with you somewhere between processing papers and pretending not to care." The words shattered her, because she had never let herself think them, never let herself believe that what she felt was anything more than loneliness and trauma and the desperate human need to connect. But hearing him say it, hearing the truth spoken aloud, made it impossible to hide any more. "I love you too," she whispered. "God help me, I do. And I hate it. I hate that I met you here like this. I hate that loving you feels like betraying everything I hate that you're leaving and I can't follow. I hate all of it." "So do I." His hand finally touched her face, his thumb brushing away tears. "But I don't hate this. Not this moment. Not you." They stood like that for a long time, in the space between buildings where the lights didn't quite reach, where for just a moment they could pretend they were simply two people who had found each other, instead of two survivors of a war that had destroyed everything. "Come with me," he said finally, though they both knew it was impossible. "I can't. My mother's grave is here. My brother's. Everything I was before the war." She closed her eyes. "If I leave, I'll be nothing. Just another German who ran away. You'll be alive. You'll be free." "Will I?" She opened her eyes and looked at him. "Or will I just be the woman who fell in love with a prisoner while her country burned?" He had no answer for that, because they both knew she was right. There was no version of this story that ended well, no future where their love wasn't tainted by the circumstances that created it. "Then this is goodbye," he said. "Yes." "I'll write. From Munich. Don't." She stepped back, breaking the contact. "Please don't write. Let me forget. Let me pretend this was just war and loneliness and two people who needed someone to see them. Let me pretend my heart will heal." "Will it?" "Eventually. The lie felt necessary, kind. Yours will, too." He nodded, accepting the fiction because there was nothing else to accept. "Thank you, Anneliese, for seeing me, for caring even when you pretended not to." "Thank you for the same." He walked away first, disappearing into the darkness between buildings. She stood alone under the weak lights, listening to his footsteps fade, feeling her heart break with the kind of pain that has no wound to dress, no scar to mark its passing. The next morning she processed his final papers from her desk, watching through the window as his transport truck pulled away. She didn't go to the fence, didn't wave, didn't allow herself even that small goodbye. But her hand rested on her chest, feeling her heart beat beneath her palm. And she knew the truth she had tried so hard to hide. She had cared, she had loved, and pretending otherwise had been the greatest lie of all. Anneliese Fischer continued working at the camp until it closed in March 1946. She took a position with the Allied administration, translating documents for the denazification courts, rebuilding the language that had been corrupted by 12 years of propaganda. She never married, never spoke of the winter she had spent pretending not to care. When friends asked if she had anyone, she would smile and say the war had taken too much, left too little room for love. It wasn't entirely true. The war had taken much, but it had also given her something, even if only for 4 months. The knowledge that even in the ruins, even in defeat, even between enemy wire and occupation, the human heart could still find someone to love. In 1952, 7 years after the camp closed, she received a letter. The return address was Munich. Inside was a photograph of a man standing beside a rebuilt airplane, the same biplane from the picture of his sister, and a note, brief and careful. "I rebuilt her. Took 6 years. Every piece by hand. They said it was impossible, but I didn't believe them. Some things are worth the effort, even when everyone says to let them stay broken. I think of you when I fly her. I hope you're well, M." She cried reading it, not from sadness, but from the bittersweet ache of what might have been. She wrote back once, a short letter saying she was proud of him, that she was glad he had found something to rebuild. She didn't tell him that she thought of him too, that she had never stopped pretending not to care, even when no one was watching. They never wrote again, but she kept the photograph on her desk for the rest of her life, a reminder that loving someone wasn't always about being with them. Sometimes it was about giving them permission to be whole again, even if that wholeness had to exist somewhere else. When she died in 1989, her colleagues found the photograph among her papers. On the back, in her careful handwriting, she had written one line: "Some truths the heart knows, even when we pretend otherwise.